There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Vanessa Burnett. I'm based in Iowa in Ames. I'm currently in Oklahoma traveling for some family stuff. So I appreciate being able to join in remotely. So I'm going to talk about big disaster risks and what churches can do locally. So the great timing to follow Myron, I believe. Yes. And because people do have anxiety, there are lots of things that we can do about it. I think sometimes we think about climate ethereally and as this faraway thing, but one of the ways it's manifesting is in more frequent, more intense disasters. And we see that all the time. We see it this week and what's happening in the Southeast with Helene, the hurricane that struck many areas of the Southeast. um, and if you haven't heard, there's another hurricane called Milton heading for Florida right now. Probably get there like Tuesday, Wednesday. So, but it's not just the Southeast that gets hit. Um, for example, I've tried to insure a new car this year in Iowa, and three insurance companies have left Iowa because there's been so much hail damage the last few years. So, and we had the derecho, we had the town of Greenfield just got very heavily damaged this year. So and churches were very involved in that. So there's lots of things where this is manifesting. So I'm going to talk about the disaster aspect of this and how churches can be ready for some of those parts. So, this is climate change. We're going to see unprecedented, unimaginable. Those are the words we've been hearing this week about what's been going on in the Southeast. Um, we're seeing damage and weather in places that it wasn't expected before. I've been talking with people in Oklahoma this week. They're talking about how they used to get the more severe tornadoes, but now they're like moving up more to Kansas. I don't know if that's true, but that that reflects what people are seeing in the places that we live. So things that we thought were safe before are maybe not safe. We have tornadoes now in Iowa in December. We have massive floods in December. It's supposed to snow in December. So we need to be more ready for the unexpected in the places where we live. And it might not be just disasters. It might be active shooters. It might be cyber attacks, lots of things. For my background, I worked at Homeland Security for a long time. So I have all kinds of worst case scenarios. Anyway, the thing is, this planet is getting more intense. So we need to be more ready in the places we live with our people and communities. This means our congregations too, and our churches, any kinds of groups. So there's lots we can do. Let's see. So we're going to use tools. What I'm going to talk about are tools or some frameworks from big disaster management. You don't have to be intimidated. It's basically principles and concepts. So it's a field called incident management, disaster management, or emergency management. They're all like slightly different, but basically the same thing. So that's my background and experience. It's a framework that churches can use. Any groups can use what I'm going to be talking about here. I've tweaked it, to just talk about how churches and congregations can use it. You can use these basics for short-term planning and long-term planning. So, and I'm going to go over how to do that. You can start by anchoring what you would like to do about climate in your local church by anchoring it in your values and your goals and your priorities. So what do we want to do? I grew up in a Lutheran church in Nevada, Iowa. So we might be looking at well, I won't give hypothetical examples. Anyway, consider your priorities, consider your values. Where do you want to start? So kind of start there. Do we want to be more resilient? What does resilience mean? Resilience means that you can bounce back, you can take a hit and be able to come back. The reality is the security, we can't be secure from everything. We're going to have things happen. Resilience is, okay, recognizing that things are going to happen. How fast can we recover, or how effectively can we recover? Do we have reserves? Do we have capacity? Do we have resources? So resilience is very complicated, but it's how do we come back after a hit, after an incident, after an emergency? So do we want to be more resilient? Do we want to take care of more people? Do we want to do more service to our community or with our community or with our members or with whoever, with our partners. Do we want more engagement? Do we want to be better ready for certain things? So those are questions about priorities. And with those would go goals and objectives. What are our specific goals? But what I would suggest is keep those in mind, and then we'll come back to that after I kind of go through this process. So the next thing is find a team or set up a committee, get a couple of people together, decide that you want to do something. Okay, we want to deal with climate in our church. Let's find a few other people. Let's get started. Have a team, have an initiative, a group, a committee, do a series, have conversations, and then make commitments. Ask people to commit, to get involved in this work, because this is coming and there are things we can do right here where we live. So the planning process that I'm going to talk through involves three things: situation, resources, and risk. And this is the basics of like doing big disaster management. You always come back to these things. And like, for example, I liked that we had a wildfire story in the prior speaker. I'm from wildfire originally, and we would call this situation, like situational awareness. So you start with the situation, resources or resource status, or what are the resources that we have, and then risk. In wildfire, risk would be like fire danger. Like, is it extreme fire danger? Like, for example, today, right now in Iowa, there is elevated fire danger, which is because it's fire season in Iowa in the fall. So that's a risk, right? But there's lots of different kinds of risks. Are we at an increased risk for floods, that sort of thing. So assess the current situation. Situational awareness, have situational awareness. What's happening in our community? What have been the issues in our community? Where is it happening? How does this affect our church, our congregation? Be realistic, be honest. One of the problems with disasters is we assume things, or this is getting handled, or, well, that looks kind of funky over there, but I'm sure it's fine. Like, you drive, for example, in the wildfire world, you drive up a canyon and everything is made of wood, and there's like all the houses are made of wood, and there's trees over everything, and there's grass along the ground. And, I just drive up there and go, seriously? Like, how is this not going to burn down? And then, eventually it burns down because it's dangerous. So assessing the current situation is important. So just look around your community. You can talk to the emergency management people. There's lots of resources. You can assess. Now, the number 2 is to assess the resources. Who do you have that you can work with in your congregation, in your church? Are there existing teams or initiatives? Can you create some? Who are the members that are interested? How do you reach members? How do you recruit people? But also, what's our budget? Can we get more money? Do we have ways to bring in more money? What are our partnerships? What churches or other groups do we regularly work with that we could do more with climate? Our facilities, vehicles, equipment, kitchens can be relevant in a disaster. Lots of churches serve meals and things. Facilities for shelter. Sometimes churches serve as incident command posts for teams that come in. Supplies. There are lots of churches that are involved in disaster response elsewhere, and so they're very good at that. But like, do we do things locally? Okay, so that's resources. Assess risk and risk potential. That can be consequences that could happen, threats that are out there, vulnerabilities that you have. A vulnerability would be like, well, I live in a floodplain, or our church is in a floodplain. Or a threat would be, like a hurricane is coming to Florida right now this week. That's a threat. And then potential consequences, like if the hurricane hits Florida and people are already flooded out and their houses are already damaged, like, how is this all going to work? How are they going to get the state evacuated? And so consequences are a big deal. Anyway, that's all part of risk. So you can look at the history of where you live, imagine worst case scenarios, talk to emergency managers, look at the science, have conversations. Talk to people who've been around for a while. People forget things that happened 20, 30 years ago. New people have moved in. Be willing to see and talk about things that people tend to take for granted or assume will be handled. Oh, I'm sure someone's got that. Well, usually in a disaster, one thing that happens in a disaster is everyone assumes something's handled, and it's not. And then next thing you know, it's damaged or gone or not working. So then you put all this together, you make a plan to make a plan, right? So this is where you kind of want to get all the pieces, put it together, think about what you want to do short term, what you want to do long term, or if you just want to focus on one or the other, get your team or your committee or your initiative, have a series or have workshops or whatever, and then get started, then make a plan. So again, go back over the situation, look at the resources that you have or what you could get, and then look at the risk. So you can start by going, hey, what's easy? What's the low-hanging fruit? What can we do quickly to help us be more ready? Or what's the most urgent? Like, what does our congregation probably need the most right now to deal with climate to help us be more resilient or whatever? Here are some examples that I just wrote down. Are there vulnerable low income communities in a floodplain? Do you have bird flu worries about supply chain interruptions? If you're not tracking bird flu, it's a thing that's happening, and that's a whole other call, but it's out there. It could eventually spread to humans, and we could have another pandemic. That's it's a very serious thing. If that happens, we're gonna have lots of issues, not just supply chain, but so talking about bird flu and really being honest about that, that's a risk. And it does relate to climate change, as other speakers have mentioned. And we're going to have more pandemics and more disease as climate change unfolds. So these things are important. Are there people in a place where a fast evacuation might be needed and your church can help with that? Can you get involved in some of the planning that the emergency managers are already doing? Do you have emergency managers? I live in a town that doesn't have a full-time emergency manager, and we're in a town of 60,000, 30,000 because we've got a university, but we don't have a full-time emergency manager. So there's a lot of gaps and a lot of places don't have one. So nonprofits and churches fill in the gaps. Another example is that your congressional demographics might have certain vulnerabilities. So anyway, okay, I'm trying to wrap it up. So again, what are your values, priorities, and goals? Add this to what's easy and urgent to start with, and that can help you actually make a plan. Then make the plan. Whether, pick a thing. Don't do all the things. Don't do like a comprehensive, because what people do is they get bogged down and they make like a 5-year climate plan, and then by the time it's done, it's not relevant. Start with something simple, pick one thing or pick two things, and then start going after it. Have weekly or monthly meetings, actually act on it, execute the plan, and then iterate. Go around in a circle. So every time you iterate or you update the plan or you decide to take on something new, go back over that situation. What's happening? What are the resources that we have? What's the risk? And then what are our values, priorities, and goals? And are those things changing given what we've learned and what's happening? So that's basically the stuff. I have some ideas that I could run through just for what to do, but I know we're tight on time. So if you guys want to hear the ideas, I'll do those. Otherwise, I'll do my takeaways really quick. Make teams, get connections, get going. Like community and conversations and connections are going to be really important here. Figure out your values, priorities, and goals. Commit to act, make agreements, whatever you need to do. Do an assessment of the situation, the resources, and the risk. Plan to plan, actually plan, execute the plan, and then update it. Update the plan, revisit all the stuff, and iterate. And I would end by saying, keep the faith, encourage each other, and we find strength when we do things and do them together. There's a lot of climate anxiety out there and eco anxiety. We can navigate that. It's get throughable. Humans will survive. So how do we get through that effectively and with the least trouble and damage and hurt and pain? So this is a place to start. Okay, thank you. And I'll do questions whenever we get to that.